Take a look at this whiteboard. This is the most basic way I can break down the exact project that I'm working on for my book. It's going to take a lot of explaining to do, but I think it'll make sense in a little bit. But first, I want to preface it with something, okay? And also, I don't expect you to be able to read my handwriting. It's pretty messy. I'm like forced to write in all capital letters, or else it'd be completely illegible. I want to first start with something and tell you guys I have a very unique perspective on human nature. I would say male nature more specifically, because I have been half raised in the West and half raised in the East. I am American, but I'm also Japanese. And Japan, they tend to have a lot of pride. So my in their Japanese culture, and my family's no different. So my grandparents, my Japanese grandparents, uh, made my parents promise that they would equally raise their children Japanese as well as American. So when I was a kid, from the time I was born up to age 12, every single summer, while everybody in the US was off with summer break and going to the beach and whatnot, for me, I would be over in Japan studying. And I would be studying actually in the school, the elementary school that my mom went to. And there's a very different perspective that not just Japan, but the East, Asia in general, has about individualism. Individualism is sort of the like it's what everything is built off of. Individualism, liberty. Yeah, can't speak today. Individualism, liberty, um, the pursuit of greatness. I guess you'd call it individual greatness. That is the central ethos of the West. And what that's based off of is uh, sort of these Enlightenment ideals, more specifically Jean Locke and Jean Jacques Rousseau, who had a very heavy influence on Thomas Jefferson specifically. The influence that they had is that human beings have natural rights, were sort of created with a blank slate where we're not good or bad, good or evil. We're just sort of born, and then our society sort of molds us into who we are. And ideally, because human beings are basically naturally good from that standpoint, then governments should allow the space for individuals to flourish and to become great. And I think there's a lot of I do think that that idea is a lie inherently, but it's almost like a productive lie, because look at what's happened as a result of that mindset in the US is we produce a ton of great individuals. And furthermore, before that, especially in like the feudal Middle Ages and just across most of history, even in the West, up until the Enlightenment, I would say, there wasn't really an emphasis on individuality. And it didn't necessarily say that individuality is bad per se, but there is always sort of this inherent understanding of orders of rank. You look at the Catholic Church. I went to Catholic school. I was raised Catholic. The Catholic Church is very, very hierarchical. All right, there's definitely orders of rank there, and I think what happened long ago is people sort of conflated. This sounds pretty bad, but I think it's true, and there's some truth to it. I'll get to that in a second. But people sort of conflated order of rank with value of that person, and sort of the revolutionary idea of the West, more specifically America, because I'm American, so I'm speaking through that lens, is that greatness doesn't have to be found at the top of the hierarchy; it can be found at the bottom of the hierarchy too. And so, objectively great individuals like Thomas Jefferson, although it's through error, I would say. Um, Let me reverse this a little bit. History is written by the victor, right? History is written by great people. And those great people cannot help but project their own values and sort of universalize it among the masses. This is something that Nietzsche was critical of a lot of philosophers, saying, well, um, they end up finding personal truths about themselves, and then they universalize it among everybody, even though it might just be a particular psychological state that they are personally going through. And so I think that's the case with great individuals, and Thomas Jefferson in particular, and some of the other founding fathers too. Luckily, this is for another video, but luckily a lot of the other founding fathers thought that human beings weren't inherently good, and that helped to actually build a robust system of checks and balances, but that's for a whole other thing. So Thomas Jefferson, the guys who thought that, who were Lockean, Rousseauian, really thought that human beings were inherently good. They sort of universalized that among everybody, not just among the top class. So basically, all men are created equal, right? So we are able to have people from the low classes now, with that mindset, with that ethos, be able to rise through the ranks, achieve greatness where otherwise in past times that would be impossible. Because in past times, if you just weren't at the top of the hierarchy, like let's take the Indian caste system, for example, you have like the people at the top and the people at the bottom. There was literally no way for no upward mobility for people at the bottom. It just didn't like exist. So America revolutionized that, where the common man, greatness can come from the common man. All right. Now, here's the thing. There are repercussions to this that I think people don't realize or understand, where if everybody's looking and to achieve greatness, individual greatness, that is going to appeal to a very small minority of the population. What most people want is just to live well. They want to have good lives, and they also want to be a part of something more of a collective greatness, right? That's how people were able to structure themselves in hierarchies back in the day, and still to this day in some certain societies where, like, you could be at the bottom of the hierarchy but be okay with it because there's a code of conduct and rules and things to conform by with that, and you're okay with that because there's a greater collective greatness that you're a part of. I think what's good about sort of that hierarchy, I guess, is sort of this idea that, okay, people in the low class should behave this way, people in the middle class, which is a new concept by the way, should behave this way, people in the upper class should behave this way. There's a code of conduct, and what brought everybody together was some sort of sense of unity of their nation, or well, nationalism is a bit more of a modern concept, but more their society, their tribe, their religion, right? Like I said before, Catholicism is inherently a hierarchical religion. And so that gives some sort of structure to people's lives. And with this radical individualism that we have in the West, that kind of disappears. So it really helps for really ambitious people in the common class, like myself, to be able to have the space to actually move upward in the hierarchy. Whereas otherwise, if I was just born a commoner, 1,000 years ago, doesn't matter how good my ideas were, how smart I was, or whatever, it would be very difficult, dare I say, almost impossible to get to the top. Right now, so what's happened is we've the ethos of the West and the sort of um, this emphasis of the individual, right, helps that type of person move up. But what about the rest of the people? Because the rest of the people, like 90 something percent, um, that's not going to be what's fulfilling to them. That's more than likely that's not a temperament that they have. The problem with the blank slate theory is that it ignores these genetic predispositions that you have, basically your personality, in which a certain lifestyle is going to fit the most well with that personality. Um, and so most people aren't going to fit in that mold. I apologize if I'm fumbling over my words. It's a tough thing for me to explain, so I'm going to explain it more in my book. But that's the purpose of this channel, after all, right? To try to articulate my ideas as they're forming. So, in order for I wrote about this, and I'll probably post it on my Substack eventually. Sort of this great sacrifice that the West has made is the sacrifice of, okay, we're going to sacrifice the collective, the well-being of the collective, in order to have some individual great people rise out of that collective, the commoners, and be able to make society better. And then, hopefully a rising tide lifts all boats over time. So America inherently has that sort of idea of like the great man theory that Nietzsche's accused of having, of that just this collection or a small group of great men are the ones who actually write history and move humanity forward. So the idea of American individualism is to create the space for those types of individuals to rise up. All right. Now, the problem is, I don't think, I think there have been times where perhaps the collective was able to rise up with the guidance of these great people, but there's nothing really that is uh, collectively guiding us all anymore. And instead, now it's just a bunch of these people with that idea that we were taught in school, right? You could be whatever you want when you grow up. Um, we're all these individuals trying to seek our individual destinies, where the reality is there's only a very small percentage of us that'll actually be fulfilling. And the vast majority of us, it'll just be terrible because we all are trying to achieve some sort of greatness, but I think most people want to have a collective greatness that they're a part of. This isn't something that you're going to hear most from most YouTubers, influencers, or whatever, because by definition, if they're trying to create their own thing, they're probably going to be more in line with the person who individualism is made for. All right. Because collectivism, especially in the US, is that's looked down on as like the worst thing ever because it's so antithetical to what America was founded on. All right. But it doesn't mean there's not going to be some consequences to that. Now, this is where my Japanese, sorry, voice crack. This is where my Japanese background and heritage comes in. You know, I went to Japanese school, like I said. There was never, ever, from my recollection, a sentiment of of you could be whatever you want when you grow up. It just wasn't really a thing. There was a sense of individualism that is admired and revered in Japan. This is something that the author and writer Yukio Mishima, who is a Nietzschean, by the way, was very concerned about is westernization of Japan. And one of the things that he was concerned about was this huge emphasis on individualism rather than uh, being a part of a collective, being a part of conformity in a way. And ideally, I actually have this written down somewhere. Of all things, Chat GPT actually gave me a really good answer to this. So let me find it really quickly. I have a bunch of notes and essays and stuff here, so let's find out. Okay, so here it is. So this is via Chat GPT. I basically typed in like what well, I forgot what I typed. I'll just read it. So it says, in contrast to Western individualism, which often places a high value on personal autonomy and the pursuit of individual desires, Bushido emphasized a harmonious integration of personal virtues within a collective framework. The balance between individual excellence and society and social duty was a hallmark of the Bushido code. Okay, so now I remember. So Yukio Mishima really wanted to bring back sort of like the samurai code or sort of like old Japan as it was getting westernized. And there's especially in Japan, there's a heavy emphasis on hierarchy, knowing your place and all that. But it's not necessarily um just like all about like just the individual. Everybody's individually free. It's you possess and maintain individual virtues yourself with the idea that it's going to benefit the collective. At least that's kind of my understanding of it. Again, this is my interpretation based off actually being raised in Japan, right? So if some if somebody discovers this video or says like that's not what he thought, like dude, unless you were raised in Japan, shut the fuck up, all right? Like doesn't make your opinion invalid, but it just makes it different unless you've actually been raised in that culture, all right? So anyway, so this is sort of I'm going to bring this up now with all that prefaced. Let me check my screen, make sure this is showing up on. Okay. This might be a bit hard to see, but I'm going to try my best. Maybe this will be the best way to do it. Okay, let me figure this out. All right, so here's my theory based off of a lot of historical analysis, a lot of studying, and also just a lot of personal introspection and the fact that I meet with a group of men probably collectively 4 or 5 hours a week, and they just tell me about the problems that they're going through in their life, and we just try to come up with solutions and all that. And I've been doing this for years now, so I think we're going to start off with the obligatory. Okay, so the obligatory is sort of the things that are demanded of you by society. Now, in the West, we have this idea of like, oh, that's bad, right? Because we're radically free individuals. We don't want to be obliged to anything. Well, funny enough, what I believe is that this actually gives structure to your personal mission in your life. So let's say that your goal in life, or you believe that you're born to be a painter, or born to be a musician, or born to be a writer. Well, in order for that to even exist as a concept, somebody had to have come up with it, right? Like, so there's already always going to be the sort of this unconscious desire, and we're tribal creatures after all, to oblige to the obligatory. Usually, this is like your sense of community, society, whatever. The disillusionment of this is what's causing a lot of nihilism. That's for a different video, and that's going to be included in the book. But basically, you have these personal wants and needs, and it can be separated into wellness and greatness. That's what it says there. Sorry if you can't read it. So, wellness is just living in the present. Well, I'll start with greatness. So, Ralph Waldo Emerson defined greatness as looking toward the future, right? And great individuals, that's exactly what they're doing. They're visionaries, right? They're not living in the present. They're not living in the past. They're trying to move forward into the future with greatness. And I would consider that, what we would consider that is masculine in the modern day, because that tends to be like a manly trait, right? I do believe masculinity and femininity are social constructs based off of greatness and wellness. That's for a whole other video, or else we'll be here forever. I have a whole book I have to explain with that. And wellness, on the other hand, is if there's something that's constantly living in the future, there's something that should be living in the present. All right. So let's take, for example, we can use this as a real example of like companies, right? So Apple, Steve Jobs, clearly a visionary, seeking greatness. He needs someone to sort of just keep him in the present, or else the company will fail, which it almost did multiple times, which is why he got fired one time. And so somebody like this current CEO, what's his name, Cook or whatever, Bob Cook, I don't remember his name. He's more sort of like that wellness part, right? Living in the present instead of having a vision for the future. Now, Apple as a company, I think long term, they might be a bit screwed because they don't have those visionaries anymore. But it's important to have that dynamic in any sort of polity or any sort of group of people. All right. Now, here's where the issue comes in. You see here with people who are more wellness driven, tend to be females, tend to be more feminine tempered type people. I don't say that in a bad way. Um, Okay, sorry guys, I lost my train of thought. It's hard to articulate all this in a short format, but basically, yeah. Emerson said greatness looks to the future, so wellness looks to the present, and masculinity, I think, is more in line with the idea of greatness, and wellness is more in line with the idea of femininity. Side note: this is where I think Nietzsche's philosophy is basically perfect. However, he has a major gap in it, in the fact that he doesn't understand women, which is reflected in his romantic life. He did not succeed in his romantic life. I think it's because he was so focused on greatness, which is a very masculine way of looking at things, and he wasn't focused at all on wellness and self-preservation. So basically, greatness seeks to go out and dominate, and even at the expense of its own life, which is a virtue that Mishima really admired as well. This sort of self-sacrificial element in terms of in order sacrificing yourself for something greater, whereas wellness just seeks to preserve, and that's something that women have that men have less of. If they're in their most perfect form, I guess. And Nietzsche really couldn't recognize that. He put everything in the purview of greatness because he just really didn't understand femininity that well. So anyway, for wellness individuals, anybody who's mostly driven by wellness, they can have sort of this collective mindset or an individual mindset. And people who are more drawn toward greatness, mostly men, they can seek individual greatness or collective greatness. So the vast majority of men, even if they're like very masculine guys, they might not necessarily be like these entrepreneurial people who are like, they might fit really well into a system, being as a part of a team, but not the leader of the team. So with them, that's being a part of a collective. And the very few people, like I said, that the West is made for to this idea of radical individualism is for these people, the individual right here, which at the very best is going to be 25% of the population, probably a lot less. All right. Now, you can have masculine female individuals, masculine, just I think masculinity and femininity, you can have masculine women, you can have feminine men. I'm not trying to say that's good or bad. It's just based off of your temperament of whether you are focused more on the future or more focused on the present. Okay. Now, the problem comes where, like I said, in the West, we create a society that really champions this. The reason I have a star there is I have this sort of, if you could see this here, like that, best with individualism, best with conformism. All right. So this is individualism, conformism. And I think with most people, it's more nuanced than just being one of these things. You probably have a bit of a temperament of each, as in you're not going to be 100% wellness focused or 100% greatness focused. You're probably going to be like 80-20, 70-30, whatever. That's where individual temperaments and individual differences come in. Okay. So now we can look at this. Imagine this as like now this example here is somebody whose temperament is mostly in line with the collective greatness. Okay. Their personal destiny, for lack of a better term, is in line with the collective greatness. So they want to have some level of wellness, right? Because anybody who, unless you're like, like a top 0.01% super individualistic person who has very strong ideals, you're probably going to want to enjoy the fruits of your labor, right? You're probably not like Nietzsche, where you're literally willing to live in poverty and sacrifice yourself for the Ubermensch, for the coming of the Ubermensch in the future. So this is a cup. So imagine this is a cup, right? And in order to, ideally, you want the cup to be as filled as possible. And so in the modern day, I mean, we have a lot of comforts and stuff, right? We're starting to become more decadent. Let's just say that wellness, for the most part, isn't really that big of an issue for modern people. We might say like, oh, well, I have less than the rich people. Well, from an absolute standpoint, you're way richer than, kings and queens like 500 years ago. Kings and queens 500 years ago didn't have technology, didn't have the internet, didn't have an iPad, all right? And nowadays you could find, technically poor people doing that. It's just that when we do that comparison, it's more on a greatness standpoint, actually. So anyway, just purely from a wellness standpoint, this is something that's a bit more of an objective metric. Like, are you well fed? Are you struggling to like eat food or whatever? like, do you have shelter, etc.? So most men have this filled up already. All right. Now they need some level of greatness, at least some level of overcoming, in order to not feel nihilistic. All right. So this wellness and just living well, whatever, having a steady paying job, living in a house or an apartment, doesn't matter, having a car, being able to eat food, that only gives you so much. If that's all you have, you're going to be nihilistic because you haven't reached this part here yet. Now, again, this is the graphic for a collective greatness personal, right? So these guys being a part of a collective greatness will help cure their nihilism. So they don't necessarily have to be these like super high achieving entrepreneurial giga chad dudes that a bunch of like Instagram masculinity accounts just freaking jerk themselves off to in each post that they have. If that's your temperament, that's fine. But look, I have that temperament. Okay. There's a lot of sacrifices that come with it. Trust me. I'm not going to get into that here. But most people don't want that. And I realize that because I actually work with guys in person, where I'm not just like some theorist. I mean, a lot of this stuff I came to by like working and talking with guys and clients and just viewers of mine for years to really see like what they actually want. Right. And just having a more of a historical view, all that type of shit, whatever. So most of these guys will be happy with a collective greatness. All right. Now, the problem in the US and the West, especially the East, Japan has a different issue. This book is intended for a Western audience, not for Japan. I probably will do that one day. I have to actually go live there again in order to do that, but that's for another thing. That's I think 40-year-old Kevin will probably that'll be his mission. Um, so the problem is we don't have a collective greatness that we can all strive toward. So for somebody like me or a lot of your favorite influencers, they don't need that collective greatness to be a part of because they are one of those few people. And I know that makes it sound like, oh, I'm so special. These people are. It's almost purely genetic, all right. Like if you take a personality test, like Jordan Peterson's Big Five personality test, you can really see if that's something that you're driven toward and you're the lucky few, I guess, that the American West, not the American West, sorry, that Western society is built to help people like you come from a common background and achieve greatness. So I'll just give you an example with the big five personality test. For me, Ocean, my openness to experience is in the 99th percentile. Um, what is it? My extroversion is quite high. Um, what's another thing? Um, Intellect, which is a subcategory of I forget which one, is 99%. That doesn't mean that I'm smarter than 99% of people. What that means, and he's very clear on it in the website. What that means is that your interest in intellectual pursuits is more than is at the 99th percentile. All right. It tends to be correlated with intelligence, but it isn't like a direct correlation. There's a lot of people who are very interested in that stuff that just aren't very smart. Usually, those people are like like the super everybody the guys who just think everything's a conspiracy theory. So your local crackhead probably would have, or your local meth head, I should say, would probably score the same with score in the 99th percentile of intelligence. Doesn't mean that he's that much smarter than everybody else. Anyway, so what those temperaments show is that seeking individual greatness is in my temperament. And a lot of people, I have a client of mine who, he wants to live sort of a life of freedom, kind of like I do, like living abroad and all that type of stuff, and have a business and all that. And he took a test and it was very different. He was like very depressed about it. He's like, oh well, you know, like this isn't like very entrepreneurial, but like, dude, you can't help yourself. That's just part of like your temperament. It's very important for you to understand who you are, because otherwise, going through this whole thing of being an entrepreneur, for example, you might not be able to handle it, right? Just because it's not congruent with your temperament. Like the trials and tribulations of owning your own business or being your own man, there's going to be times where there's like severe downturns where like you're wondering how you're going to pay your bills. And most people would just freak the frick out, like completely freak out. Whereas for me, because I'm so based on my personality, which involves being low in neuroticism, by the way, I don't really freak out. I'm able to remain cool under that, or like sometimes not even care about it, which can have its consequences too. So, like I said, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. So, I'm not going to be one of those people that ever promote and say everybody can become an entrepreneur, right? Like most people shouldn't do that. Like if you take a personality test, entrepreneurship is congruent with your personality, then do it. For most people, it's not going to be. Anyhow, I'm sorry I'm rambling on, but it's important for me to make all these distinctions and nuances. Um, just just because I'm using this for future reference. I'm going to rewatch this and help to write my book based off of this. So, all that being said, the vast majority of people won't benefit from a society that allows individual greatness. However, they will benefit from a society that allows a collective greatness, because they want to be a part of something, especially men. This is why men, a bunch of these farmers and stuff that never met their king will go off and die in a war for their king, because they want to be a part of a collective greatness, right? Like you might be some French farmer in the 12th century who like might even be oppressed by his feudal lord or whatever, but as when they're just like, hey, it's time to go to war against the English, you're just like, hell yeah, let's go. I want to be a part of something. And so they still do it. So that's an example of a collective greatness. Now, most people have had the collective greatness they've been a part of in modern history has been nationalism, right? I'm proud to be an American. And World War II, or I'm sorry, World War One, I'm proud to be German. I'm proud to be Austro-Hungarian. I'm proud to be French. I'm proud to be British. Right? World War One, they basically just went to war just as a giant dick measuring contest. It's a reductive way of putting it, but it kind of was that way. It's like it was largely fueled by nationalism, and that like really riled people up. Now, unfortunately, the the consequences of World War One were so bad, and then subsequently World War Two, that that sort of mentality of let's go to war for the sake of our nation to show how great we are, that mindset just doesn't even exist anymore. And so what's kind of happened as a result of those wars, as well as um, societies becoming more and more secular, right? Because either if you follow sort of a Nietzschean line of thought, what ended up happening is first we all were had a collective greatness we were a part of, and rank and order and hierarchy through being religious, right? Then evolution was discovered and science became way more popular. People started to not believe in God as much. Secularism started to take over, but that void to be part of a collective greatness and that void to be part of something in a community didn't go away. So that instead that got supplanted with things like these ideologies such as nationalism, communism, fascism, Nazism, all the stuff that happened in the early 20th century, right? So now those things are gone. Now religion is gone in terms of its impact on large societies for the most part in the West, I should say. Um, and so what's left? Now we have our radical individualism, which used to be a good coupling with the obligatory. Like I said before, the obligatory, or maybe I didn't, but the obligatory is basically, I'll reiterate, is it could be nationalism, it could be the church, it could be a religion, whatever. So now you have all of these atomized individuals who have that idea of individualism in their mind because that's how you were raised in the West. You could be whatever you want, you grow up, right? Without having an obligatory or a collective greatness to give structure to their lives. And for extremely creative people like myself and most influencers that you watch, that's great, right? They could actually go achieve great things and fail and fall on their face and get back up again and keep going. The vast majority of people, though, that's not something that they're going to like, and it's not going to be uh, congruent with living a great lifestyle. And there's a hidden benefit to this that people don't talk about in terms of atomization, is that I think atomization prevents great wars from happening anymore. I honestly think there's no way that World War One or World War Two, a war of that size, will ever happen again. Because in order, the mindset of those people going into that war is that they believed in their nation, in their country, and their God so much that they were willing to go die for it. And they're willing to go die for their neighbors because there's a sense of community back then. We don't have that anymore. We don't. And the benefit of that is, like I said, those wars aren't going to happen. You're not willing to die for your fellow neighbor anymore for some grand cause. um, but the drawback of that is, like I put here, okay, your wellness cup is full. There is no risk of going to war and dying, and there's no immediate existential threat. All right. I know people say China and whatever, but like compared to like Nazi Germany and everything else back in the day, it's nothing. Okay. Especially militarily. Militarily, the US is still basically owns the world. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. So you have this, but there's no collective greatness to be a part of. And then so you end up becoming nihilistic. Now, you could have some individual greatness, but for the vast majority of guys, that's not their temperament. For me, the reason I'm not nihilistic is okay, I'm not part of a collective greatness, but I'm one of these people. And so, me individually being able to achieve or strive for greatness myself and try to do new and interesting things and all that, that appeals to me. And then that this ends up being filled up. So, I'm not nihilistic. But for the majority of people, that's not the case, especially men. And so atomization prevents mass death, but instead, what it causes is it causes a death of the spirit en masse of a lot of people instead. This is why depression rates are going up. This is why people are becoming more and more unhappy. because they don't have something to be proud about. I talked about this a few videos ago. You cannot be depressed if you truly have pride, not a false pride, not a cope pride, like a real sense of pride in yourself. And so many people get their sense of pride and derive their sense of pride from their community, from the obligatory. And if you don't have that, then what are you working so hard for? Why are you working hard to make money to contribute to a cause that you're not a part of or don't care or understand? It feels selfish, it feels wrong. Yeah, so anyway, as you can probably tell, all this is pretty complicated. I'm only scratching the surface with this stuff, but I think hopefully, and I'll make my next video is going to be about this. Is it's called the Feynman technique, where you try to teach a complicated subject and condense it as much as possible, and that actually further deepens your own understanding. And so that's a large part of what I'm trying to do with these videos. So I apologize if it's all over the place. But this is the stuff type of stuff that's been rattling around in my head, especially for the past year. But I think it's been building up even longer than that. And yeah, I hope you found value from it. If not, I apologize, but I found value from it. I mean, that's kind of the point of this channel. Like I said, is to express my thoughts for me to understand them better, to be able to write in a book, and hopefully have you guys follow on the process. It's very possible that we're both in the labyrinth and I just completely lost you guys. And if I did, and if it was very confusing, I have no problem with you telling me that, because I want to make sure that these ideas that make sense to me, I'm able to articulate properly for everybody else to understand too when I write the book. So, well, I'm still writing the book, but when the book's completed. Hope that makes sense. Thank you for watching. Any feedback's appreciated, and I will see you in tomorrow's video. Goodbye.